Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Our speaker today is from VeriSign. He's going to be speaking, his name is Andrew Scholnick, and he'll be speaking about the cyber security landscape, trends, predictions, and long-range security disruptors. Go for it.
All right. Like he said, I'm Andrew Scholnick. I run the Applied Vulnerability Research Lab for VeriSign's iDefense group. And what that means is I supervise a bunch of guys who look kind of like this guy here. They all work pretty hard. They try and uncover dangerous hacks into popular software programs, hopefully before the bad guys do. Now, I've got a lot of ground to cover today, so I'll ask that you hold any questions till the end of the presentation. So I'll be starting with a discussion of some key headlines from the recent past, in particular, a few law enforcement success stories. Next, I'll try and characterize for you a few of the important regions around the world that have essentially been hotbeds of hacker activity. Then I'll highlight some evolutionary trends and developments in the hacking world and in the criminal underground within cyberspace. All of this, I hope, will demonstrate to you that we've kind of, as a community, blown through a bunch of tipping points in the cybersecurity landscape. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the iDefense crystal ball, and I'll try and identify for you some developments that we believe are going to significantly impact cybersecurity over the next few years. We call these things security disruptors. First, let me tell you a little bit about iDefense real quick. VeriSign's iDefense group is made up of 8 primary teams that work together to discover, synthesize, and research various information regarding to the current status of the cybersecurity landscape. These teams include intelligence analysts who are fluent in over 20 foreign languages, security researchers and experts whose knowledge literally covers the spectrum of today's information technology. As these people feed a steady stream of information, analytical reports, etc., to our editorial group, they keep us looking good and keep us out of trouble. The result is what we provide to our customers, which are periodic global and specifically focused technology reports, and they culminate at the end of the year in a summary of current trends in cybersecurity. During the course of the year, iDefense periodically updates the material and presents it to various customers, agencies, public forums, and of course universities. We also make some predictions in the report, and to date 15 of the 19 that we made last December have proven correct. Of the 4 that remain, one of them was kind of a borderline issue, but we're taking it kind of as a missed call. And when I explain a little bit later about fast flux, you'll see why. So for now, let's start talking about the cybersecurity landscape and what's been going on since 2009. As iDefense compiled last year's trends paper, there were 3 clear themes that emerged. Anybody familiar with this book by Malcolm Gladwell? We at iDefense very much like his concept of a tipping point. In fact, we think that the cybersecurity landscape has hit several in recent years and has changed pretty radically as a result. So much so that it no longer resembles what it was just 5 years ago. Today we're going to discuss some of the things that are influencing this change in landscape. Anybody out there familiar with this old TV show from the 1980s? We've got one taker. These 2 guys in the picture used to do battle with all these big drug cartels. Well, at iDefense, we think that the hacker groups that are in operation today very much resemble these drug cartels from the 1980s, and I'll go into detail about why. Finally, there's been a lot of activity lately regarding infrastructure. The bad guys this year and last have been spending a considerable amount of their resources building up their infrastructure. They've improved efficiency and stealth and facilitated how they attack our infrastructure for profit. So we'll go into how. Let's get started with some headlines. The press hyped a number of partial vulnerability disclosures this year and last year, many of which targeted critical internet infrastructure. These guys were responsible for some of the more prominent ones. This new trend highlights the need that some security researchers feel for garnering greater media attention for their efforts. They purposely didn't provide full details of what they researched, claiming that they were trying not to aid malicious actors in exploiting the weaknesses. Unfortunately, their efforts fail, because as soon as one of them publishes anything of note, every other researcher in the community begins a relentless pursuit to discern what the missing content was. The original authors claim that they're withholding the information to protect the community, but their vague announcements only serve to focus attention on the problem. At iDefense, we practice what's called responsible disclosure by notifying an impacted vendor prior to disclosing the information and not going public with it until the vendor has a patch. This is sometimes a frustratingly slow process, but for the most part it works. We don't begrudge those guys their efforts to get their 5 minutes of fame for their really awesome research, but their partial disclosures are clearly not having their intended effect, and unfortunately we believe that you can expect to see more of them in the near future. So, while we're on the topic of high-profile events, the law enforcement community has had a few very visible successes since last year. For example, these guys, working with these guys, arrested 2 individuals that were associated with this group. Kaspersky's lab even modified the Shadowbot code to allow the police to take unprecedented control of the command and control servers. Hopefully, other law enforcement agencies around the world will start following that lead. We believe that the more aggressive model is the right one for attacking botnets. Which brings us to this story. Anyone track this back in March? In England, the BBC decided to do a story on botnets. So they went out, found one they could afford, and bought some time from one. And they got slammed for it in the press and from the worldwide law enforcement community for going outside the law. This guy was one of their louder critics. Rather than working outside the law, he was working with Dutch law enforcement as part of Kaspersky's team when they brought down the shadow botnet. They did it the right way, working with law enforcement. Okay, some of you are probably familiar with this guy here. He was all over the news this summer. He's a Cuban-American computer hacker who's been closely tied to some of the most prominent, high-profile corporate breaches in history. Most recently, using the handle SegVec and working with 3 co-conspirators, he ripped off 150 million credit card numbers from one of the major payroll service bureaus and several other large companies. He's got a pretty interesting story. Back in 2002, using the handle Kumbajani, he helped mastermind the former Shadow Crew carding forums, which is probably, by the way, where he met this guy who was intimately involved with Shadow Crew. More on him in a minute. By April of 2003, Gonzalez had been caught by the U.S. Secret Service. He opted to become an informant for them rather than do